Welcome back to Switch to Linux. Well, today we're going to talk about the possible replacement for my main system to get off of the Ubuntu base. I talked about this in a recent video where it is about time to move off of the Ubuntu base. It's becoming overbearing, it's becoming problematic, it has a lot of other issues and problems with it, and frankly they're aligning themselves with people that most of us switch to Linux to get away from. And so we're going to talk about the beta release of the Linux Mint Debian edition. So this is the Linux Mint which abandons the Ubuntu and utilizes Debian as a package base instead. Now, if you're unfamiliar with this particular build, which we call LMDE for short, this is the plan that the Linux Mint team has had for a long time, that if the Ubuntu core goes away or becomes completely compromised, they don't have to work quite as hard. They can just jump ship and prioritize everything onto the next distribution. And I think, in my opinion, it's probably about ready for Linux Mint to do that. They should just abandon the Ubuntu base altogether. It's causing a lot of problems and issues with the full incorporation of snaps and things like that, which is causing a neglect of the downstream packages, and it's causing all sorts of other issues. It's bloating out the system and basically turning Ubuntu into Windows. And every downstream distribution is going to be impacted by that. So the Linux Mint Debian edition is an excellent compromise where it takes a lot of the user-friendliness of the Linux Mint group and it will put it on top of a Debian base, which usually is the Debian stable, the current release, which now I think is Debian 11, if I remember. I need to go back and look at raw Debian a little bit more again. But anyway, this latest version is based on that, and they have done a few other tweaks. They put in a lot of the tools, and word is they're working on a driver manager to get away from the Ubuntu driver manager, although they're not there quite yet. So let's go ahead and have a look at it. Now, I'm going to go ahead and install it, and then we're going to just have a brief look at the system and see, could this feasibly replace the current operating system? And then that begs the question, do I give it a try? It's not like I don't have spare hard drives and an icy dock. I mean, what else do I lose? And so we're going to go ahead and walk through the process. Of course, I download the distribution, and it is 1.9 gigabytes, making it now a little bit smaller than many of the other distributions that we are downloading. Isn't it funny how that creep has occurred? Now, before we get into the installer, let's talk briefly about the resolution issues I'm having here. Since Debian is basically committed to non-proprietary things, it does not work out of the box with VirtualBox without manually installing the VirtualBox guest editions. I'm not going to take the time to do that in this particular video, so I'm going to play around with the screen resolution a little bit just to get something that's feasibly close, and then eventually I went back and upped it to something that is the same size resolution, 16 by 9, and we'll just scale that up in the post-processing. But if you're installing this on real hardware, you're not going to have this issue. The resolution issues I was having is simply due to the fact that we're installing this on VirtualBox without guest editions. So when we go ahead and get in there, the installer is right there on the home. And this is actually a new installer that I have not seen this before. Maybe I have and I'm forgetting about it, but it was an excellent looking installer. You're going to go ahead and select your time zones like usual, select your keyboard, your languages, and then once you do all that, it's going to walk you through the creation of the user accounts, and then you have a lot of other options about the disk management. Do you want to use logical volume management, LVM, or do you want to use something else? If you use LVM, you can encrypt the drive, you can fill it with random space, that's a secure wipe, you can do manual partitioning, and the other thing here is that makes this installer really good is you choose the disk it's installing on. You can choose which disk the installation goes on, and you can independently choose where the grub bootloader goes as well. So this is very nice, and then once you run through this. It's going to take a few minutes to walk through your system. And so with that, it took me about, I would say about 20-25 minutes or so, because I gave it basically 2 processing cores of my i5 and only, I think, 4 gigs of RAM. So we gave it a little bit lower system resources than I would if I were doing this on my main computer, but I happen to be in a donut shop with my laptop, and so let's go ahead and work with that. So once the installation is complete, we're going to reboot the system, and then I'm just going to go ahead and have a look at what the other options look like in the system. Just like the standard Linux Mint, we have our classic welcome screen. It has all the basic settings that you would find. There's one additional setting, and that is to install the multimedia codecs. This is once again because Debian follows this pure free philosophy, so there is not an option to install the codecs during the install as there is in the regular version of Linux Mint. So we're going to go ahead and install the codecs, and of course this is going to take some system processes that I usually don't have to worry about, but so as this is updating, you'll see it's I'm going to poke around a few other things in here, but it's going to cause a little bit of lag here and there. That's okay. That's not the operating system. That's just how little resources I gave this. So what I want to do is first let's have a look at Firefox. Now, of course, Mozilla just did this disastrous plan with Linux Mint. I wish they didn't do it, particularly because Mozilla is also working with the likes of Facebook and Google and all these other guys. For a privacy company, they seem to be aligning themselves with people who care about privacy the least. This is why people have a concern with Mozilla. Well, Debian has a very good Firefox build and a Firefox ESR that they could pull from. They have decided not to ship with that and instead to ship with the same Firefox. It is the basic default Firefox as is distributed from Mozilla, which means it has Google as the default search. It doesn't even have Start Page as an easy option. You'll have to manually add it. It's going to collect data. It's going to opt you into studies and experiments, which is absolute nonsense, and Mozilla needs to go away for it. It's basically going to give you all of the default settings that Mozilla wants. I really wish that this Linux Mint Debian Edition would ship with Firefox ESR, but it didn't. We got this crap instead. So with that, I went ahead and looked around at the rest of the system to see what else we could do in here. And of course, all of your system settings are the same, with the sole exception that we don't have the driver manager. So that's really the one difference you can find between Linux Mint Debian Edition and the Linux Mint based on Ubuntu, other than a few packages, maybe one or so versions or subversions behind. But everything else in here is going to be exactly the same, minus that driver manager. Of course, if we have a look at our software sources and repositories, you'll see that instead of the Linux Mint and then the Ubuntu, now it's Linux Mint and then the Debian options. So you can go ahead and do that. And then there's actually a few other options in there as well. So you can choose from source code repositories. You can choose the unstable versions of Debian if you'd like to experiment with the absolute latest packages in a more untested form. You have the option to do that with a simple toggle button in the software sources in the software system. And then everything else is going to be basically the same, because we're getting all of the Linux Mint type applications that they package with that basically differentiates Linux Mint from Ubuntu. All of those are here. And so we have the latest versions of Cinnamon. We have all of the connectivity. We have Hypnotics. We have Warpinator. We have all of these different tools that Linux Mint has been working on and developing throughout the time. We have all of these things. And so, hey, it's no problem to utilize this. And so it begs this final question in the final analysis of things. The software manager, of course, if you're using Flatpaks, those are all going to be exactly the same as they are. We're going to be bothered less about more and more updates because it's based on Debian and it updates about the time glaciers melt. I know it might be melting faster, but everything else here looks exactly the same. I see no reason why I can't boot this system up and use this as a replacement to my current system. I don't know. So I guess the next phase is let me install some of the software that I currently use on this VM, see what versions they are versus which versions I'm currently using. And then this is going to give me an idea as to if the software versions are about the same. Hey, why not give it a try? And I bet it might work just about the same as it always has. So anyway, there is my thoughts, having a brief look at the Linux Mint Debian Edition beta, number 5 beta, and can this replace my main system? And I think just as a cursory examination, what we have right here, I really think it can. So that'll be the next step, is to start playing around with it a little bit more, and then maybe we just wipe the disk again and go with the Debian version to get away from the Ubuntu base. Anyway, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below. Thanks for watching, and I hope that you enjoy switching to Linux. Thank you for watching this video from Switched to Linux. This channel would not be possible without the backing of the program supporters scrolling on the screen now. You can be a supporter at Patreon at patreon.com/TOMM or at thinklifemedia.com. I also want to thank the open source community who creates such excellent software that makes producing this show possible. Please remember to support your software communities. Thank you, and I hope that you enjoy switching to Linux.